Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast. I'm Chris Muntz and this is episode 37, Speaking of Diversity in High Definition with Arreon Harley-Emerson. This episode flipped the normal script a little bit, where I got to be on the hot seat. I was honored to be invited to be the guest on And the Beat Goes On, presented by Arreon and his Choir School of Delaware. There's a link in the show notes to see and learn more about the choir school, and so we agreed to co-present this conversation largely centered around diversity and inclusion. This has been a frequent topic on the Choralosophy podcast, but this time we focused on ideas about how to broaden the conversation to include people who might not currently engage in this important work. I have this theory that there are rhetorical techniques that are very frequently used in equity work that for the uninitiated can sometimes be a barrier to feeling like you can become part of the conversation. So we discussed those concepts a little bit about how do we decide who's on the right side of this discussion? How do we decide who's on the team? I think that if we discuss these things in the right way, we will start to see the team get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so that's the main topic of this conversation, and I found it really, really fun and enjoyable. Before we get to the conversation, I'd just like to shout out and thank the members of the Patreon page for Choralosophy that are continuing, especially during this very down time in less and less choral activity, keeping the lights on of this show. You can support the mission of this show and these conversations for as little as $3 a month on patreon.com/choralosophy. There is now a producer level that you can join on there, and so we have this growing group, almost 40 folks over at Patreon who are accessing the once a month, approximately, extra episode over there. In fact, this month in June, I'm going to put up a patron-only episode that kind of talks about the behind the scenes of creating the COVID conversations that I have created on this show. The show is produced on Patreon by Christopher Vasquez, Kyle Peterson, Michael Herron, Ryan Main, and Stephen Kathy Kakachik. So thanks to those folks as well as all of the Patreon members. One of the things I'm playing around with on Patreon is a new feature and a new perk for joining over there, and I actually would love to hear some feedback from you all if whether or not this would be a motivator for you to join the Patreon, which is automatically downloadable transcripts of the show. So for those of you who are visual learners, I've started to get more and more requests of whether or not I have transcripts available. The problem is the apps that do those transcriptions are not free, and so I just have to make sure that there's enough interest for that to be something that would be worthwhile. I also want to thank the folks over at Voce Vista for being a part of this show. This is a tool, a software tool, that I cannot strongly recommend enough, especially if you see yourself in a position of doing online instruction, or hybrid instruction, also very high possibility, in the next year. We need tools, right? And we need tools to be able to evaluate the way our students are really singing, even if we're not in the room. Well, that's what Voce Vista is. If your kids have anything close to a decent mic, now that could be an iPhone microphone, that could be a Chromebook microphone. If they have some kind of plug-inable microphone, that's even better, especially for your private voice students, but your choir students as well. They can record their voice, whatever the assignment is that you're having them do. They can send you the recording, which then you're not having to deal with latency issues with like Zoom or doing it on a live streaming kind of a thing, because you're going to lose a lot of sound quality that way. They send you the recording. You can import the audio file into Voce Vista, and you can take screenshots. You can do a screencast video when you give feedback to the students, where you can go through and actually show them the overtone series that their voice is producing. And you can critique that way in a very real and very high quality way, versus, again, having to give them feedback through this really low resolution streaming that a lot of us have been doing. So this is not something I recommend for an everyday use, but this might be a culminating assignment for them to do once they've practiced a song. I, again, highly recommend that you at least play with it. So the way you do that is you go to vocevista.com/choralosophy, where you can download a free copy and play with it for 30 days. If you can start to see over the summer some possible uses during the school year for it, then You're ready to buy it, you go ahead and put in Choralosophy at checkout. You'll get 10% off. Highly recommended. Without any further ado, here's Arreon Harley-Emerson and I discussing diversity.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to a joint episode of And the Beat Goes On and Choralosophy podcast. My name is Arreon Harley-Emerson. I'm the Director of Music and Operations here at the Choir School, and we're thrilled to be having this joint crossover episode with none other than Mr. Chris Muntz. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm doing great, Arreon. Thanks for having me. This is going to be fun. One thing I really enjoy doing is talking, so this will be fun.
Well, I've been meaning to, like, your name has been on, I have like a sticky note. I have like a wall of sticky notes in front of me right now, actually. And your name has been on a sticky note for quite some time for someone that I wanted to catch up with and check in on and see what's going on. So I'm really excited to do this. And I'm also excited to, like, I'm a big like DC and Marvel fan, and I love crossover episodes. It makes me go really, really crazy, and I get really excited. So I feel like we get to have our own like Marvel or DC comic moment.
Right.
So
when worlds collide.
Exactly. So how are you doing in the midst of this pandemic and all the craziness? How's life? How are you making music? What are you doing?
Well, right now, school's over, and so I'm not making music right now. I'm a dad and a husband, and right now is family time. Now, if there had not been a pandemic going on, I would be quite busy because I'd be preparing for our Conservatory Summer Choral Institute, which is a big summer camp we put on, hosted by our professional choir. This year we had Jason Ferdinand coming to Kansas City. We had Kyle Fleming coming. We had Melissa Bauman coming. It's an amazing panel of clinicians, and we had to cancel it, obviously. Um, and we made that decision back in April. And so, had it been a normal year, I would be full time revving up for that. All the planning that goes into the logistics of having 150 kids all in one place and different choirs coming together and performing. So this is the weirdest June that I have ever experienced, and I know that doesn't make me special. That's kind of what everybody is dealing with right now.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it definitely is strange. So sorry to hear about the canceled plans. I know, like, there is definitely like a grieving process that has to happen, and I know I'm just not over it, and it's okay. I'm like okay that I'm not okay about all of the things that are being canceled, and I think you gotta allow yourself, to go through that process, I think, of, kind of missing out on those sorts of things. So tell us a little bit about what were you hoping to achieve during the camp? Like, what were you going to be, like, what are the focuses of that? It's just interesting. I've never actually heard of it before.
Yeah, no, it is a at the risk of sounding like a flex, it's a one of a kind institute. I don't know of any other that quite do what we do in the summer, and so this would have been the eighth consecutive year that we did this camp. So what we do is we have a small professional vocal ensemble in Kansas City called Contra KC, that my wife and I and one of our friends, Courtney, who is a choir director here in town, founded 10 or 11 years ago. And 3 or 4 years into that experiment of founding this group, we decided to expand like an educational outreach portion of the group and start this summer choral institute, because almost everybody in our group are choir teachers or voice teachers in some way. And so we have this passion for not only performing, but we have a passion for educating and for getting kids engaged and that kind of thing. And so we created this model that was kind of a hybrid between a professional adult performance outlet, but also let's bring a bunch of kids in and let's rehearse with them. Let's stand in the choir and let's sing with them. Let's perform with them. Let's not just come in and do a clinic and then walk away. Let's walk with the kids all the way through the process, from rehearsal through to performance. And in addition to that, let's bring in world-class educators from around the country, and have them work with different age groups and have them put on their own performance where the adults are not singing with them. So it's kind of like it's a hybrid exchange kind of a thing where I'm the artistic director of the camp, but I give almost no artistic direction because I'm putting that out to other people and trying to, and it's really neat. It's something I'm proud of, and thankfully, all three of our awesome clinicians that were supposed to be there this year have agreed to come back next year. So we're just going to
Nice.
push pause and then reboot.
Awesome,
Yeah,
awesome. And I absolutely love the idea about what you're talking about. What you're talking about with having kind of your pros in is exactly that's our model. That
awesome.
what you described is exactly what we do every day at the choir school, where both the kids and the adults, many of which are pros and music teachers and conductors themselves, are all singing together.
That's
And I
awesome.
think I wish there were more intergenerational choirs about that, and that's something that I think I would really hope that we would move to as a larger um, kind of choral community, that we would kind of see the value in some of those intergenerational experiences, and just not enough in America. You see it in the UK, but you don't really see it here in America.
I
So
agree.
definitely.
That's been one of my missions with it, since the beginning, is that you look at the UK and the thought that, well, I'm just going to say it this way: there are pockets of folks in the U.S. that see choir as a thing kids do, and that once it's like, a kid's activity, like taking tennis lessons or whatever, and they don't see the value of it for a lifelong pursuit of passion. And so one of the things we do with our camp, and it's awesome that you guys are doing similar things, getting kids to see adults do it and do it with them, so they can see, what, I
Mhm.
could do this when I'm a 45-year-old dentist.
Right.
That's the idea.
Exactly. And that lifelong singing, I know I've heard it a lot, at conferences and things like that. People talk about lifelong singing, and generally, what people mean by lifelong singing is that community choirs that are older, but no one is actually talking about bridging all of those various ages, which is something I'm passionate about.
Yep.
That's kind of like where my doctoral work is and all of that. So I'm really super sold on that. And if anyone ever wants to have a conversation about like intergenerational choirs and building them and all of that, like shoot me a note, because I have lots and lots of thoughts and opinions on that today, which I won't go into.
Well, I will
But
ask.
one of my questions,
Now, can I
yeah,
ask you a question now? Since,
yeah, for sure.
since we're co-hosting. Yeah.
Yeah, go
Okay.
ahead. Feel
So
free, jump in.
on that topic, then, if
Yeah.
you were to go and talk to the average Joe Schmo person
Hmm.
who is not a music educated person,
Hmm.
meaning that music is not a part of their daily life, their daily thought process, their daily energies, and say, describe to me what you think of when you think of a choir. What do you feel like most people would say?
Most people definitely will skew younger. They think of kind of the elementary, middle school experience. Some will go into the high school, but it's definitely, I think most people see choir as like an elective that you can take in school. And
Or really old people.
or church choir,
Yes.
like old church
Right.
choir, like not even like what like some of the high octane like church choir and choral organizations. People definitely have a preconceived notion of what they think choir can or should be, and that's that's on
Yeah.
us as a choral
It's a
community,
branding
because
problem. It's a branding problem.
it is.
We did an experiment with our pro group. So because our camp that we do with the kids only happens 1 week each summer. The rest of the organization's season is the adult pro group exclusively. We do concert series and stuff like that. So we did an experiment one year where I had that theory that most people, most average everyday people, think of choir as something kids do and something old ladies do in church. And when they think of what a choir sounds like, they tend to think of, again, little kids' voices and then old warbly lady vibratos or whatever in church. And they almost are completely unaware of the fact that there could be like high level professional youngish adults that make these mind blowing noises in a room that can
Hmm.
send chills down your spine. And so what we did was we don't have a very large budget, so we invested a good chunk of it to rent a table at our local art fair, which has thousands and thousands of people coming through it all the time. And we decided it was almost like market research. We decided to not use the word choir at all when talking about what we do and passing out basically free tickets to our concert like candy. We use the word, the phrase professional classical vocal ensemble, at which point people went, "Oh, well, isn't that neat?" And
That's so funny.
and then started using, like, just asking tons and tons of questions. And as a result of that, we had a concert the next night after the art fair, and we had by far our biggest jump in first time ever audience members. They showed up with those little free tickets from the art fair, expecting to hear this form of music that they'd never even heard of, and then some of them stayed afterwards and said, "Oh, that was like a choir, but like an awesome choir."
Yeah, exactly. That's amazing to me.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And did you continue to use that messaging? Do you continue to use that messaging, or or do you use kind of both choir and vocal ensemble?
Yeah, we don't have very many references to the word choir anymore on our materials.
Interesting.
Um,
That is so interesting.
yeah.
Hmm. And I don't know why we've allowed that story and narrative and messaging to kind of, be out there, but I guess we have somehow, and I guess we all have a hand in it one way or another.
Mhm.
But it's just
It's for everybody.
I don't really understand.
Yeah,
I don't
choir
really
is
under
for everybody. They just don't know it yet.
Right. They absolutely don't know it, and most people don't know just how moving the kind of voice can be, particularly unamplified a cappella music. It tends to be something that people just can't quite conceptualize. And just a quick story: we hosted Voces 8 in October, I think it was, and they came and they did a concert with us. And a lot of we were like, okay, we really want to like make sure that people are coming, and we're going to like let people know. And they also, we did not call them a choir, we called them a vocal ensemble, but we weren't intentionally necessarily doing it and like you were. But some of the feedback was just like, I just can't believe that people could ever sound that way or sing that way. And they were talking about not just about Voces 8, but even our ensemble, because they just thought that choir was going to be something that was a distant memory from a poor church choir experience or from elementary school or something.
Yep.
I don't know, but it definitely, people just could not like conceptualize like what the experience was. They were just like, what is this? And I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that means that we're offering something that's special. It means we're offering something special.
Right? Yeah, and we
So
just have to brand it better.
definitely. And I'm telling you, I think that in music school, we spend a lot of time, learning literature that most people won't be able to do with their ensembles. And we also don't have enough like courses that teach us how to navigate the industry or the business part of it. And I think that would be really useful in like choral conducting class, like the business of choral conducting, like how to message things, how to get your messages across, how to fundraise, how to make it all happen. And I think it would be really really useful, because I certainly know that a lot of trial and error was kind of how I learned a lot. And that's life, I suppose.
Yeah, I
I guess
agree.
that's life.
I agree.
So how did you stumble into doing choralosophy? Or maybe it wasn't a stumble, maybe it was a leap.
Yeah, that's like it's okay. So this is going back now to February of 2019. The show launched in February, right before the ACDA convention in Kansas City happened, the national convention. In January, I'll make this the short version of the story, so we can get to the juicy part later. But I had been working in church music for 20 years, part time, in addition to teaching at public school in suburbs of Kansas City. I'm 18 years starting next year into that process, and but church music had been kind of my side hustle for my whole life, and was working for a church that was having some financial problems, and I was quite expensive. So I got laid off from the church without a whole lot of notice, and suddenly found myself with a whole bunch of time on my hands, and decided that this was a point in my life where I wanted to try something different. And um, I was noticing problems that I felt like, not that I could solve by any means, but that I could at least start talking about in the form of a podcast, that might that people might find valuable. It's actually when I was sitting with my accompanist at the school after having lost the church position. She it was actually my accompanist's idea to do the podcast. She said, "You are such a nerd, and you talk constantly about so many random things, and that's why your students like this class. But what if you did that and just turned on a microphone?" And I was like, "Oh, it's an interesting idea. I can't imagine who would listen." Um, but turns out there is a demand for conversation. So here's how I would frame this. One of the problems that I saw was that we are really bad, and when I say we, just mean humans. We are really bad at conversation online. We're just really bad at it. So I'm going to use the analogy of like a high resolution photograph versus or high resolution data uh, versus a really pixelated low resolution image. Sending text boxes of your thoughts back and forth on Facebook or Twitter is the lowest resolution form of communication that there is. The highest resolution form is you come over to my house and sit in my living room and sip some whiskey and talk for 4 hours about whatever it is that we want to talk about. That's the highest form of revolution or resolution. Because when uh, if on Facebook you drop something that you believe into a text box, the other person can't see your body language. They can't see your hear your tone of voice. They don't know your life story. They don't know what got you to the point where you think that. So all you get is that little box of text outside of context, which is super low resolution. If you're at my house and I say something that you don't agree with, you have a chance to really quickly and in the moment say, "Hey, what do you mean by that?" Because I see that very differently. And then we continue the conversation, and maybe an hour later you say, "Oh, I still don't agree with you, but I understand what you're saying." And so what I was seeing conversations about things that affect how we do our jobs in the choral world being dominated at that low resolution level, that Facebook text exchange level. And so my thought is podcasts and conversations, they aren't the full resolution, because ultimately you still need to come over to my house, but they're higher resolution than text exchanges back and forth. And so maybe this would be something that people would enjoy being a part of. And so far that seems to be the case.
I definitely think that there's definitely a demand and market for it. And I remember when I first started listening actually to your podcast, I started listening in late May going into June 2019. Funny enough, I was on my phone, and for work, I was looking for a marketing podcast, and I was looking at kind of like arts podcasts and new kind of podcasts in there. And I saw Choralosophy, and I was like, who's this Chris Muntz guy? Like, I'm going to listen. And so I listened, and I've been listening ever since. And then I kind of went back and I listened. I think there might have been at that point 2 or 3 episodes that I needed to catch up on, but I've been kind of tuning in, and I think the conversations are really helpful, and they have been timely. I thought you had some great conversations about diversity and equity in February. I loved the conversation with Amanda and the Band-Aid vowels, and using Voce Vista, which is something I wish people did more often. Like, I just think that there's a lot of great stuff that you have been able to cover. Talking to Jason Max Ferdinand, that was another one. I loved that so much. I mean, so I think thank you for doing it, number one, and two, keep doing it for sure. I know that like we're all starved for content, and so it's been wonderful to have. And I guess I didn't realize how recent it really is
Mhm.
that choralosophy has been around, because it feels a lot longer, and maybe it's just the pandemic getting to me,
Right.
but it feels like it's been around for a long time. It feels like, oh yeah, it's just a staple. Everybody knows about choralosophy,
Well, in internet time, a year and a half is an eternity.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
it really is.
Yeah. Jumping in to remind you that there has never been a more important time to support small businesses. And at some point in the near future, for some type of choral activity that you participate in, you're going to need to buy sheet music again. When you do, just a reminder, first stop for Choralosophy listeners is ryanmain.com and graphitepublishing.com. Both of these websites are owned and operated by small businesses. Ryan does his own thing for the most part, running his site. One of the cool things about Ryan's site is that once you buy the PDF, you own it. You get to make as many copies of that as you want, which is a really cool thing. And there's great stuff on there for lots of age levels. And of course, at Graphite, you've got a larger stable of composers like Eric Barnum, Tim Takash, Jocelyn Hagan, Joshua Shank, many more. And they have an amazing search engine there where you can sort out the different levels and instrumentations, all of just great tools you can do from your computer at home. And then once you're ready to buy, you can use that Choralosophy checkout code and get 10% off. Yeah, just head over to choralosophy.com, and then I have a tab at the very top that just says the show. It's just about the show, and it has I've got a sub page there that has the whole podcast feed, but then I've also got them broken down. I have two highlighted portions which I called COVID conversations, and then I also have a page dedicated to all my conversations that I've had about diversity and inclusion, because I've had, I'm up at like 8 or 9 different episodes just like on that type of topic. And so I've kind of broken down the themes. The rest of my episodes kind of bop around from topic to topic, so I haven't grouped them yet.
Yeah, awesome. And about diversity and inclusion, how did you get interested and passionate about diversity?
Well, I'm going to come at this with two different angles. One, to go back to the analogy I keep coming back to of how to have a conversation. Um, I feel like because we've gotten so low resolution in our conversations about this topic, that was actually one of the passions that I had about starting the show from the beginning, was seeing that low resolution conversation developing online, um, and recognizing in a well in a way that I think also a lot of people didn't recognize, where when you have a low resolution conversation where there starts to become one approved way to speak about a topic, no matter how well intended it is, the result becomes shutting people out of the conversation that we really need to have as part of the conversation. So the part of my thought process for having these episodes on my show is to kind of maybe lead by example, I guess, in the sense that I could have a conversation with people about topics that go way deeper than those exchanges back and forth. But then for me personally, why it's a passion is because I have students that I love, and since I love my students very deeply, I want them to have an environment where each of them, every single one of my students, can access the life-changing things that happen in a choir classroom. And
Mhm.
and so just to give you an example, so my as I don't know if you can tell with your screen resolution, but I'm a white guy, and yeah,
No.
you might have to adjust the color on your screen just to make sure. But yeah, and I grew up in a very white suburb of Kansas City, um, and I still teach in that same town, although it has become quite a bit more diverse. And what I've noticed is that's awesome. Like I've noticed that what that's done for the students in that those classrooms, because I like to try to keep it as an individualized as I possibly can, is the kids then are put in positions where they have to have conversations that I didn't have to have. I shouldn't say that I didn't get to have as a kid. So and as I've already explained, I'm very passionate about conversation. So one of the things that I now realize as a 40-year-old white guy is that growing up in the 90s and the 80s and 90s, I was starved from hearing personal stories from people of color. They weren't presented in the media. I wasn't watching them in movies. I wasn't reading them in books. So in a real sense, I wasn't having conversations. Okay. So when I realized that in fact, I've been teaching in this district long enough to have seen with my own eyes the kind of diversification. When I started teaching, it was even 16 or 17 years ago in the district. It was quite a bit wider then than it is now. So I've seen those conversations begin to become more common. I'm having personal relationships with kids, and I was seeing the value of representation and the value of a young kid who comes into my program and looks at our top choir and they don't see any faces that look like them. I can see how that's a barrier to them thinking they can do it. And because I grew up around only white people, I had never understood that. I had never understood it. So what it took was some trial and error over many years of teaching to try to figure out how I could make an environment in the classroom where no matter who they were and no matter where they came from, that each student walked in thinking, this is my place. Like this is where I belong. Choir is my family. And so it's a passion for me in that way, and for those reasons. It's all centered around my students.
And that makes perfect sense. And have you found um, what in these conversations that you've been having with a lot of conductors of color, what has kind of bubbled to the forefront as like where we need to be starting or where the issues are? What have you kind of taken away? What has been the kind of the salient points and characteristics?
Yeah, I find that because most of us get our information from these low resolution Facebook conversations on this topic, that people are usually surprised to know how much diversity of thought there actually is in the choir world about how to approach these problems. So, for example, I'm all about conversations that make. In fact, there was an episode I did with my friend from here in Lee Summit, Jazz Rucker, who's the equity chair for our state organization. And one of the things we talked about in that episode was the metaphor of how many seats at the table can we make when we're talking about equity and diversion, or equity and inclusion. Um, so it's not about if I get a seat at the table, you don't get a seat at the table, was Jazz's analogy. It's let's pull up another chair. And then I came in with the idea, well, why don't we get a bigger table? Right? Why do we have to feel limited as to who gets to have conversations about this? And so so one of the problems that I've seen with the way that this gets discussed online is, let's say, I use this analogy. Let's say you and I, Ariane, agree on some big educational inequity issues, and let's call them A, B, and C. And you and I both agree that A, B, and C are an issue. And then I might say, oh, yeah, but don't forget about D. D is also an issue. And oh, yeah, you say, yeah, I can see that. But my focus is A, B, and C. Even so, at that point, we've already disagreed a little bit, but we're still on the same team, right? So then here's where the problems get bigger. You and I agree that A, B, and C are a problem, but then I say, I think that part of the cause of that problem are D, E, and F. And you say, no, no, I think the cause of the problem is G and H. At which point on Facebook, we are already on the wrong team. We have already decided that we are no longer on the right team, even though we agreed of what the problems are. And it even gets worse when you start to talk about what the possible solutions are. So what I see as a problem is we've gotten to a place that in order to be on the same team, We have to agree on what the problem is, what caused it, and how to solve it. And if we don't agree on those things, we don't get to be on the same team. And to me, what that does is it shrinks the table. Right? With every level of of where those conversations are not allowed to have. So so here's how I look at it. If I'm on a team, I want to sit next to the person at the table who sees it differently than I do, because I know that I'm going to be focused on my passionate issue. I'm going to be focused on the cause of the problem that I'm the most passionate about solving. And I know, because I'm human, that I probably have some kind of confirmation bias or tunnel vision going on, where if I'm the only one who gets to look at it my way, I might miss something. And since I'm passionate about the team winning, I want the person next to me who focuses on something else to say, "Oh, be careful not to focus totally on that, because then you might miss this." And of course, that's a really big brain way to think of it, but I think it's important. And it's just, you can't do it on Facebook. It cannot be done.
I agree with that, and I guess one of the other things that I always um one of the sort of I guess things that we always talk about is two things here: a seat at the table, and I often think that we often do, try to squeeze people at that table, or in some exceptional cases we go out and get a bigger table. But I think that just because you're at the table doesn't necessarily mean that you are still empowered to be able to um, voice things, or that necessarily what your voice comes with the same gravitas, weight, as other people who are at the table. So that's, I guess, to me, that seems to be one of the things that we're struggling in with our national conversation. Is it's like, yeah, now we all want to kind of get under the big top, and we all want to have these conversations, but it's just like, you then, like, if you're going to have someone be a part of the conversation, then they have to be a part of the conversation. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? And so that's one of the things that I see very often, and I do a lot of diversity and equity and inclusion work in in Delaware and in the Mid Atlantic, and we call it DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And it's this big thing. And one of the things I've taken from the league, the League of Orchestras, the Association for Orchestras, is they've added a B to that, so diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And I really like that because I do think that, in addition to creating space at the table, adding more seats to the table, getting a bigger table, whatever it might be, but making sure that people feel that they belong at the table. And the only way to make people feel like they belong at the table is if you are able to accept their input, and kind of have that acknowledgement that it comes from a lived experience.
Hmm.
And I think that's the kind of thing that we struggle with. And I also really appreciate it, what you're talking about, that we have to agree on the problem, is because I think that we all like to agree on the symptom. Like, we all like to say, like, yeah, there should be more Black people. I want to see more Black people. I want to see more Black people in choral music.
Hmm.
But then no one wants to really have the conversation about what it's going to take, and what challenges or barriers there might actually be. So I often try to. I think it's great to be able to agree on the symptoms, I think the real hard conversation is kind of agreeing on, like, what is the problem, or let's explore kind of the power imbalance,
Hmm.
because I think a lot of times that's where the inequities begin, and they kind of then will bubble up and become symptomatic. But I think the problems can be asymptomatic, if we want to think about it in that way. And so I always wonder, what are the best ways to kind of just talk about what exactly those kind of power imbalances are, and how should we be talking about them, and how do we get to the agreeing on the problem rather than the symptom, I suppose.
Yeah, that's a really good way of thinking about it, I think. But first, what I would say is that Well, my answer is going to be probably annoyingly simple. And it's just to be willing to have the conversation, even if it makes you feel uncomfortable. Even, and this is one of the things that I've done on the show. I am sure that if any person listening to you and I talk right now were to go through and listen to all my episodes on this topic, you'd probably find a ton of things you disagree with, a ton of them. But I decided that what I was going to do is decide to have the conversation anyway, because I think it's important. And so in order to get to the point where we're making true progress, the table does have to grow. So to keep that analogy you just mentioned, I'd like to see more Black people in choral music. Now, if somebody else came to you and then said, actually, no, I'd prefer that we have like separate white choirs and separate Black choirs exclusively, and I don't think we should be mixing people in choirs. Well, then I would look at them and say, you don't belong at this table. You're not going for the same goal that I am. So having you at the table doesn't help me because we're not on the same team. Okay. So that's important. It's important to look and that's why I have this scaffolded approach to it, where let's first talk, let's establish as a group, whoever it is that I'm talking with, do we agree on the goals? Because we can't talk about causes and solutions until we've even agreed that we're all fighting towards the same battle. And the only way to know that ultimately, and I know people think they can know it by like a 2-line post of text on Facebook about someone else. They think they can, but they can't. So have the conversations. What I always encourage is in your local ACDA chapter, your state chapter, your just the other teachers and directors that live around you, have a conversation with them. Let's talk about in our area, because just like with COVID, every area faces different challenges.
Mhm.
With this, what is standing in our way where we are? In my area, it would be, what are some challenges standing in the way of uh, you know these diversifying suburban school districts, which would even be a different challenge than what our Kansas City public school, like our city schools, are facing. They have different challenges. We have different challenges, and so I think it has to do with being willing to have the conversation, being feeling safe enough with your colleagues to verbally and honestly express how you see the problem being shapen without feeling like you're going to get put into a box or yelled at. Um, you know,
Mhm.
it, I don't know. I feel like my, how, the meme, there's like a meme about this where nobody ever changes their mind from conversations online. Have you ever heard people say that?
Yeah, of course. People say it all the
Yeah.
time.
I don't know if maybe I'm just that weird, but I've changed my mind a lot from conversations that have initiated online. But what's weird is I don't usually keep it as an online thing. I'll start DMing the person, or I'll set up a Zoom meeting where I try to have a conversation. But my mind has changed on a lot of things because I'm willing to listen. And I think that does have to go all around the table. Like everybody has to, or else people won't feel comfortable putting their talents, putting their energies into solving the problem.
Mhm. And I also think that a willingness, I agree with that. And I also think there's also a little bit of what I always like to tell people is like there needs to be some steam valve moments because I think I know that I personally well, one, no one person can speak for any one full race or everyone's lived experience. But one thing that I can say is that I know that it's like sometimes I you feel like you just need to be able to hit the steam valve and be able to kind of express in a way. And oftentimes, because it's a challenging conversation, people feel uncomfortable by it. And so it's like you have to know exactly like how much you can allow your steam valve and your venting and your expression and frustration to to be able to voice that, and at the same time for that other person not to feel like they're like a punching bag and like, like the target of like 400 years plus of oppression in the United States. So it's like a really difficult balance, I think, to achieve. And I think that's the hardest bit. And I was on a conversation, I had a conversation with a colleague who was having an issue at his school, and he said something to me like, I'm really trying to move our school forward and trying to be more progressive about like how people see race in our university and blah 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 blah, and the students upset and it's just like, we can't be productive here. And my response was, it's like, so you're telling me that you can't listen to someone vent for 10 minutes after she is dealing with 400 years of historical trauma that has exploded into this one moment. Are you really telling me that you can't just allow 10 minutes? And it's like, and that sometimes I think is the challenge. It's like, like you don't want to, like the person who's receiving this feedback needs to feel safe and comfortable and not like they're a target and going to be canceled tomorrow, and then the person, who's expressing at the same time needs to feel like they've got the space to be able to do that.
Yep.
And I think that's the hardest thing to set those conditions. And like and over the last week I've been telling people like, you just need to give some people some time to express how they feel. If you feel offended by some of the things, trust me, it is not meant to be necessarily in that way. Of course, you should not be anyone's punching bag, but know that like this is, particularly in this moment and with the Black Lives Matter movement, we've reached a point where it's just like, you know, the weight is just, we have the seesaw effect, and it's just kind of like inertia is flowing, tensions are high. And it might just be that, like, you're in a meeting with your Black colleague and you're like, well, I really wonder why, and if that person all of a sudden has this reaction, it's not necessarily just that one issue in that one moment, but it's about the larger history of trauma. And I've been reading a lot about historical trauma and just how much it actually changes your DNA. Like, I was uninformed on like how like current Black Americans, our DNA has actually shifted, and encoded in that DNA, we can see signs of trauma. And it's like, what? Like, I never even like thought of these things before. And I was reading a great study that was about like tropes with Black people, about why Black people don't like to swim, or why Black people are afraid of dogs, and all these sorts of things. And like to trace these things back to such horrifying, ways that people were treated, 150 years, less, not even 150 years ago. We're talking about early 1900s. So like, I can understand why people need to let the steam valve go, but I also understand the other side. Like, hey, look, I'm just trying to work through an issue here and trying to make things better for everybody. So, I don't know. I think I have to think about like maybe we need more uh, kind of like prescribed ways to have these conversations or something. But
Yeah.
I don't know. But I just know that I responded to my colleague, who I love and have lots of respect for. My reaction was honestly like, are you telling me you couldn't wait 10 minutes to let someone express, and to, after all of this, And so it made me think, and I was like, oh, well, I can see, the challenges. I really can see the challenges.
Yeah, yeah, and those types of release valves, you're absolutely right. The way you framed all of that, I completely agree. Um, yeah, so I'm gonna tell two vulnerable personal
Hmm.
stories related to that, what you just said. Um, First, since you brought up the hashtag, essentially, where originally the Black Lives Matter expression, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like that was 2017 was when that hashtag went on for the very first time.
Yeah.
Right. And because I'm a person who, as my kind of one of my core fundamental philosophies is that race is a social construct. It doesn't really exist. It's something that we have placed on ourselves culturally, which I is not even a super controversial idea, um, and that all humans are equal, right? So when I first heard, and this is I tell this story because this kind of helps illustrate how people can actually change their mind if they're allowed to have conversation. When I first heard the expression Black Lives Matter, my very first reaction was to think, wait, but all lives matter. Hold on a second.
Right.
Okay. But of course I was smart enough to not go blast that on Facebook. What
Yeah.
my first reaction was is to, okay, I wonder what they mean by that, because I like to govern my life based on the assumption that what someone says is with good intent until they make me believe that it's bad intent. And so instead, what I did was I started listening to some podcasters talk about the topic, some listening to some explanations that were a little bit deeper about what that expression means, the expression Black Lives Matter, and then I heard the examples that are now turned into memes. About, the wife who says, "Honey, do you love me?" and he says, "No, I love everybody." And how that's not,
Yeah.
and then it started to make sense for me. I just needed a second. I just needed a second to think about it, to process it, to have somebody explain it to me, because it didn't make sense to me right away. And the reason I share that story is because my instinct is that even your MAGA hat wearing neighbor who puts it on Facebook book all the time, if they were in a high resolution conversation with you in your living room and that lasted a while, where you had a chance to vent, be vented at, and vent back, people could come to those types of understandings where they might say something like, um, it's not the expression I would choose, but I see where you're coming from. Well, even if that's all we can get, that's like one step better, right? So I've had that same experience with so many things. I told a story on my podcast early on about how I came to shed the belief that I was raised with, which is that gay people shouldn't be allowed to be married. I was taught that growing up. I no longer believe that, and it's not because someone shamed me on the internet. That that probably would have caused me to dig my heels in and to prove that I was right a whole lot more than instead I just had a chance to have loving interactions with mentors who were gay, to where I started then saying this thing I learned in church doesn't make any sense. And so it's a gradual process. And so that's one story. And then the other one is that you mentioned the historical, kind of the concept of historical trauma. Are you familiar with the term trauma informed care?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Hmm.
So, you know the term then an ACE score. ACE.
ACEs.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Adverse childhood experiences for anyone who
Yes.
doesn't know what ACEs are. Adverse childhood
Yeah.
experiences.
So I've never talked about this on a podcast before, but I'm just going to say it. If depending on which version of an ACE test you take, my score is usually about a 7. Um, my I had a lot of childhood trauma, and I know that the I've read quite a bit of the research into the epigenetic effect of trauma on a person's body, on a person's mind. It changes the way you think. There's even research that can show that it can change health outcomes and make certain things harder for you. I've struggled with being overweight my whole life. I've punished myself for childhood trauma that I didn't deal with. I didn't seek help for, and I punished myself with food for years and years. Punished myself with all kinds of things that, had I dealt with those things in a healthy way, or had a chance to even vent them in a healthy way, could have made my physical body healthier. And now I have to work really, really hard every single day at the gym for an hour and 10 minutes, every single day to try
Mhm.
to undo the damage that I did to myself based on that childhood trauma and lots of other things. But so, the reason I tell those two stories is because y- these are the types of things that if you, Arion, don't get a chance to vent those things in a meeting or in a discussion about these topics, then the people at the table with you won't ever know those things about you.
Mhm.
And in the same way
Mhm.
that if you don't sit down in my living room and have a conversation where I could tell you stories from my childhood and the types of things that I went through, you would have no capacity to understand where Arion comes from, and you would have no capacity to understand where come from. And yes, race plays into that, but ultimately, when it boils down, it's a human problem. All of our experiences define us as individuals, and so that's why I think that if we're going to have success in these areas, it's going to be first at local small groups of people level where people can make changes in their classrooms and in their communities.
I 100% agree with that. And I also think, like, additionally to that, I think there are also, we can't change people's hearts. Like, we can't do it. It's just not a thing. And it takes people time to change their minds. But we can also change what kind of systems we have in place. And I think that's like really important because I personally, like, one of the things that I hope to accomplish before I leave this earth is to really help the academy, and by the academy I mean the music academy, think about how we train pre-service teachers. And there are a lot of schools who are starting to move to, like, teaching for inclusive populations and all these sorts of classes that I never had when I was in school. They didn't exist, they weren't a thing. But I ultimately think that we have to figure out a way to reconcile in the academy, how do we love and get really good at this Western European art form while also acknowledging, you know, diversity and being inclusive, because the very nature of choral music is a very Western European shrine. It's like, a lot of times, I joke, my husband's white, and so we walk into museums and I'm like, great, another shrine to white people. And it's just like, that's just what it is. And that's like, kind of our like banter and joke, and we go back and forth all the time about these sorts of things. And that's kind of what the academy is, the theoretical, like, study of music is. It's like, great, it's another shrine to white people. And so, like, it's a really tough thing. And I don't know that we have the answers yet. I don't think we have the answers yet. But I do believe in my heart there is a way for us to love choral music, because I'm not saying get rid of Western church music and, like, no, I want the Bruckner, I want the Brahms, I want all of it.
Hmm.
Um, and I think it can coexist with, music, both idiomatic and non-idiomatic, of all peoples. And so I think that's something that we're going to have to think about quite seriously as we continue to move forward. And I look forward to committing myself to thinking through these kind of larger systems, because I think we can't we only know that which we are taught. So it's like, once we are taught, like, oh, this is the way that choral music should be, or this is the way that police should be, or this is the way that blah, 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 fill in the blank should be, that's what we think. I grew up in super fundamentalist, laying hands on, picking up snakes kind of background. So it was just all I knew.
Right.
So, like, I'm just saying that, like, you're taught those things and you believe those things. And, like, unless there's counter education, if that is even a term,
Hmm.
then I don't know. I don't know how we progress necessarily. So I don't know. I'm just excited to think about these issues and to continue to you know, have challenging conversations. I think that's all we can do. It's not all we can do, but that's a beginning and a necessary part for the work that needs to be done. But I do have a question for
Yeah.
you. That's one that I always like to ask people is what do you think about cancel culture? And specifically, I want to talk about um, these these everyone now is like, Dine in the Kitchen's a racist song. I had no idea. And, for me, I'm like, what do you mean you didn't have an idea? Dine in the Kitchen? Like, like, I mean, what do you, for me, it's so obvious. And for me, a lot of these like songs that, American songs, I mean, they have a sound to them, and I don't know how to describe it. That's probably a dissertation of its own, is like these songs that it's like, I also joke, I'm like, I know a racist song when I hear it. I know by the melody. I know it. And they have this kind of sound to them. And it's not just Americana, because Copeland doesn't have that sound. It's, there is a quality to some of these songs, and I wonder, should we be canceling these pieces like I've been working on the railroad, or Dinah, or Pick a Bale of Cotton, and all of these pieces? Like, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know that I'm qualified to answer that on a specific song by song basis, because I
Mhm.
haven't done the research. And ultimately, that's also partly my answer, which is I think that there probably has to be some element of song by song teacher doing their own research to understand where a song comes from, and at the very least, um, if it's going to be, if something in that category is being presented, that it's being presented in the right context. If there is any, so for example, I can picture a scenario where a choir or a choral organization in good faith could present almost like a history museum type of a concert, where certain pieces from a variety of, I guess you could call, ideological frames come, if they were to be thoughtfully presented in such a way that the audience doesn't, like, if there's a song that has a racist past and the audience feels like that song is being glorified in some way, to me that's a huge problem. I just don't know if I know enough about any of those individual songs, and partly for me it's because, like, at the high school choir level, I almost would never come across arrangements of those songs
Mhm.
anyway. And so I
Mhm.
don't really, I understand what you're saying. I just think I don't know the answer to that. And I don't, other than just saying it's probably not a cut and dry answer.
Yeah, and it's something that I've been kind of monitoring some of these, what I like your term, low resolution conversations that have been happening on them, and I've been kind of formulating my own, and I think it's really interesting that we're in this time when we're in a kind of cancel culture time, which I think can be dangerous. And I like to just say that because I think that we we can all be redeemed, is something that I honestly do believe. And I also believe that we are all, if we are too quick to cancel people, then we might not allow people to evolve, be out of fear. And so that's something that I worry about. And I don't know yet where's the line, and when do you cancel someone and you never perform their music, or when do you cancel someone and whatever. So I don't know where those lines necessarily are. I feel like it's that Supreme Court case. I know it when I see it, that kind of a thing, but I don't know that we have any like guiding principles for it. But one thing that I've been kind of thinking about in my own kind of meditations is trying to figure out, I've been thinking about it side by side with kind of like some of these memorial statues that we've been having. And I hear people that are like, these are shrines to racism, let's take them down. and other people who are like, no, it's cultural heritage, let them stay. And then there's all sorts of arguments that are in the middle of, in between those two polarizations. And one of the arguments that I've been trying to distill and see how it lends itself to choral music is, well, we should take the statues down, but put them in a museum so that they can be, so that history can be seen, and we need to learn this history so we don't repeat it.
Mhm.
Right. Right. So I'm like, okay, if that's a thought process, how does that work in choir? If we are transposing that now to choir, does that mean we don't use it in school, but we use it in concerts? Like, what is the equivalent of our museum where we preserve the history? Is it just a music archive or a music library? I don't know. And so like that's one of the things I know that I am trying to kind of work through, like what does that look like in a choral sense? And I don't have that answer yet. If I don't think anyone has 100% has that answer yet, but I think it
Well,
perhaps might become more.
that's a good question. My thought immediately would be, let's, because again, I teach in a high school choir environment. I probably wouldn't present any of those songs in any context at all. However, I could see an argument, I could entertain an argument that they should be presented in some type of music history curriculum within maybe a music appreciation class, and have it be presented, what was the role of minstrel songs and how did that contribute to the evolution of music as in a big picture. I can see how that you could do that easier in a lecture type back and forth class where dialogue could happen, where kids could raise their hand and say, what did this really happen? These types of things really went on. And then a knowledgeable teacher could say, yeah, it did happen. And here's some big picture context. And, but I think about how hard that context would be to present during a high school choir concert. And,
Right,
and so my instinct would be,
right.
I would just rather not open up that can of worms, because I would either have to stop the whole concert and give a lecture, or I would have to, which would make the concert already longer than it is, and the kids want to go home, and I want to go home. So my instinct would be just to not present those songs. I don't know if that's the right answer. It's just probably what I would do.
No, I mean, I tend to agree with that. I just like what I've been thinking about is like, do we burn these songs? Do we take them out of the library? Like, I've been thinking like, what do we do with them? I mean, obviously they're out there and they exist, and I never. One thing I do think is we never should try to make the past not happen, if you know what I'm saying, because I think that's a problem. I think when we make the past not happen, that is very, very problematic. But at the same time, I don't necessarily think that it needs to be glorified. And
Right.
like if you go to Germany and just how sensitive the Germans are to kind of Nazism and the Third Reich, and they're like, we're not having any statue. There's not a question or a debate about it. They're all gone. It's like we are so apologetic for it. It's just the mindset is very different than it is in the United States. And so it kind of makes me think, well, how did they get to where they are, with how they kind of feel about that history? Like they aren't preserving any of those songs, of which there are many. So it makes me kind of wonder, like, how, why, what's the difference? What's the, why do we think about these things differently? And I don't have the answer to that, but I think it's
Yeah, it's
interesting.
important. That's a good question.
Right. And I think we have a lot to learn, maybe from, I mean, we're a baby country. We're like this old. And like there are so many countries that are so much older who have dealt with some, I think, some traumatic situations and all of that. But what do you think is the best thing that we can be doing to begin to, like, what are some of the things that you do in your classroom um, to champion equity? And what are some things that if anyone wanted to get a start tomorrow, like you could do these things? They don't need a big ramp to to launch them, but just some simple things that we can do.
Yeah, that's good. I think first what I would say is that, earlier on in our conversation, I used the example of who do we have at our table, and my ideal, if I was in charge of tables, I don't know, I'm the king of tables, is that I would try to have anybody at the table who agrees on what the big problems that we're trying to solve are, because then we're at least all working towards the same goal. And so just to illustrate where sometimes this can go wrong, there is in equity circles of discussion about this topic, there definitely is kind of a fight between, is it is it the people or is it the system that needs to be addressed here? And of course, because I disagree with everyone about everything, I like to raise my hand and say, can it be both?
Well, of course.
Can can there be, so in other words, if I like to use this analogy, if you're going to think, since we've been talking about some race things already, I would make the argument that if tomorrow somebody could flip a switch and turn off all racist thoughts in any person's brain on the planet, there would still be problems. There, but at the same time, policies and systems come from people's imaginations. Like we have to engage with both of those things. So I think that the people doing system work is important, but also people doing individual relationship building in their classrooms and choirs is where where, in my opinion, where our everyday focus needs to be, because the people who design the systems and the policies that we're going to live, that my children will live under, are the people in my classroom right now. And if they learn, if every kid of every shade on the spectrum of melanin in their skin who comes into my classroom, if I've formed a relationship with them that is meaningful, that is reciprocal, um, then I have so much greater chance of impacting that student and helping them learn. They know that I'm on their team. And my goodness, I speak about this. It does not mean I'm perfect at it. I have let kids slip through the cracks. There have been kids, especially because our program's big. There have been kids that come into my classroom of all colors that slip through the cracks, that never feel important, that never feel like I made time for them. But all I can do in the classroom is try to figure out a way to make every single kid feel critical, like feel like they are integral to the process. And so if you're going to break equity down, ultimately, and you keep breaking it down into what each kid needs, you're going to get eventually to individual solutions. Yeah, and while other people, and while on my podcast I might be discussing system level things, in my classroom, I'm dealing with those kids individually. They are my students. So I would just encourage people to not lose sight of that. That when the singers walk into our rehearsals, they aren't walking in representing a system. They might be a victim of a system. They might be a product of a system, but they're just kids. And heck, with our old folks, they were just kids once too. And they're all human, and so finding a way to connect with them allows these conversations to happen, and also that people can change with conversation. That's another one. I'll share one other personally vulnerable change story, because again, I'm trying to drive this home because I think it's so important. People can change. And I don't think, I was raised um, in the 90s when being colorblind was the wokest thing you could be.
Mhm.
Like we were taught that, as a kid, I was taught that the skin color of a person does not matter. And I would say that was done with good intent, because my parents' generation was taught that skin color did matter and that it made you better than them. So my
Mhm.
parents' reaction was to say, no, that was evil. Let's teach our kids that skin color does not matter. And now we're having a conversation where, again, somebody's pointing out that, hey, maybe it's both.
Mhm.
Maybe it's about skin color and not about skin color all at the same time. Maybe there's both. And so I've had to personally work my way through that contradiction because of how I was raised, and I still believe if you're going to use skin color as a determination of how another person is valuable or not valuable, then in that context, I would say no, skin color doesn't matter. But if you're going to look at the system and look at outcomes of how certain groups of people are being well, what their outcomes are as a group, there is a value there to that kind of what you could call intersectional approach to
Mhm.
looking at stuff. Where I differ from people though is that I don't like the idea of either of those approaches being the exclusive way of dealing with it. I don't think intersectionality and those types of approaches, the critical race theory and all those types of things, I don't think those can be the only way we look at it. I think
Right.
in my opinion, that should be one of the many arrows I pull out of my quiver to be able to approach the problem, so that we can still look at our kids that come in the room, the poor white kid, the upper middle class black kid, the kid from Puerto Rico, second generation, who speaks English but his parents don't. All of those kids have different challenges in our room, and if we can't see those kids as individuals, then we're also in trouble. So there has to be this um, nuance, I think, to the conversation.
And I think, I spoke to Maria Ellis about this kind of this point here where I think, yeah, we're dealing with issues of equity now, but trying to move towards justice. And what does justice kind of look like? And I really want to kind of highlight that for most people, your mind is changed, your heart is changed based on personal
Yep.
experience. So it's like, guess what? Like, this is my first ever gay friend I've met. He's a person too. Gay people are great, right? Then first black person I ever met. Wonderful. Love black people. Fill in the
Yep.
blank. Like I feel like everyone's got a story, and that's kind of how it happens. Meeting one person at a time, and you begin to start to change your opinion because you get beyond the otherism
Yep.
and you get to the humanism and that kind of connection with them. So I think the kind of height of where we need to be is it's like, so what if you live in an all white community, an all black community, or all fill in the blank community, all heterosexual community? How do we get to the point that even within those communities, like that there's still appreciation and value for diversity? And I think that's kind of the kind of pinnacle of what I hope that we're going towards, is that even though we don't have someone like that here, that we still have empathy for that person and we still care for that person. And so I think that uh, I always say this all the time. I think the when it comes to race, particularly the white teachers who only teach white kids tend to have more of a burden than if you teach at a diverse school, or or you have, like, at least some diversity there, because I think then you are completely shaping the the values and belief system of those people who are in your classroom.
Hmm.
So I think that's the most challenging thing, is like, and also in the home, because home is where education starts. So like if you're an all white family and you all only live in a white community, how do you teach your kids to value black lives, or X or Y or Z? And I think that's kind of what I hope we can move to. I think that will be slow and incremental, but two steps forward and one step back is still one step forward,
Hmm.
I guess. And that's kind of what I think is is where we need to be. And just as we start to like wrap things up, you mentioned something that's been in the back of my mind, is it's just like, at that table, like when we're all agreeing on like about what the problem or issues are that we need to be here. Like, and does diversity mean we're all together? Like, does it mean like, oh, we have the black choir come and the white choir come and the Filipino choir come and the blah, 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 or are we all together? And I think that, to me, the height of like celebration of one another in culture is when people still have cultural identity but value so much the culture of others that it inspires them to want to share in each other's culture
Mhm.
and traditions. And like, I think that's the goal. That's the prize. Is it's like, God, like I really love my culture and I love the thing that we do in our all black choir or our all X choir. And like, God, I really love that other group, man. Like they sound so great and they have such great heritage and culture and are so amazing. Wouldn't it be so great if we could get together and do this amazing thing? And that would be the world I would want my children to inherit.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I mentioned the example of the concept of color blindness as being, you can understand it one way in the what I would consider a proper way of understanding it. Then, but you can also, if you're not careful, understand it in the improper way, which is very much related to what you just said, which is thinking about trying to erase our differences as a way to get us to equality and equity. And I completely agree with you. That is not the way. The way is to get rid of concepts that would put your culture on a different place in a hierarchy than my culture.
Hmm.
You can do both. You can say your culture is awesome. My culture is awesome. Now, I won't even go down the road of I'm a Midwestern white guy. I don't even know what my culture is. I don't have a other than saying "ope" when I bump into somebody. Like I don't know. I guess barbecues. I don't know, but that's not even a white thing. So I don't know. I don't know what my culture is. But but I think that you're right in that the end goal, the dream, is that people could have rich cultural identities that sit on equal par to the other cultural identities. And what if in the choir world, what if people could walk out of their cultural bubbles where they grow up and they interact as a family and in their church or whatever it is, and walk into a multicultural ensemble? And I know that that's one of the things that, we don't like the term multicultural ensemble anymore, but what if all choirs were multicultural ensembles? Meaning, even if we're singing Bruckner, even if we're singing Brahms at that moment, that people come from their different, beautiful um, cultural expressions to join together in one common task. So yeah, I think it's a cool thing to dream about, and I think that every time people have conversations like that, assuming they're all at the same table working towards the same goal, I think we do get closer. I just think that progress like this does take time. It takes the ability for people to change their perception over time. Like earlier on, I shared my own personal kind of journey from being raised to think that gay people getting married would send them straight to hell. I was taught that, by the way, we're telling them that because we love them.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's how I was raised. And
yeah.
genuinely, with some of my family members that still believe
Mhm.
that, they do mean it. They mean
They do.
they mean that because I love you so much, I'm not going to let you burn in eternal hellfire, and I'm going to try to save you. I now think they're wrong. But the reason I thought they were, but the reason I thought they were, that I now think they're wrong is because my choir teacher in high school was a gay man who I idolized like you would not believe, and started having my own internal contradictions about what I'm learning at church can't be true, because what I'm seeing in the real world, they can't both be true. He's good. He's a beautiful human. He is my mentor. He can't also be evil. And
Right.
but that took me 3 years, 4 years to figure that out. So ultimately, progress is slow, and I think that
Yes.
frustrates people. That frustrates
It
people.
and I think that that's the thing that's so tough for people of color, particularly because it's like after all this time and we're still working, towards this goal. And like, when are we going to get there? It's like, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? And I think we'll always be asking that question because I think that we can always be more perfect.
Mhm.
And that's the whole idea of the more perfect union, is that there's always going to be an opportunity to improve. Just like in our performances, we can always do better or bring new understanding or nuance to it.
Yep.
And I mean, I guess here, cheers to the struggle,
Yeah.
and cheers to progress and challenging conversations. And I don't, I don't know what the future is going to hold, and I think this is certainly an interesting time. 2020 definitely takes the cake for interesting world
That
events.
is for sure.
So, I'm really interested to see what what the what we have in store for us, and I'm really interested to see what we can do in the choral community. And I genuinely believe that as artists, we should be out there leading the change, and that we have always as artists been on the forefront and on the cusp of
Mhm.
progress. And I hope and implore that we are all on that precipice, and we're all on the cutting edge, and wanting to see what our children's history books say about us is kind of, where I am on all of this.
I agree. I think it's beautiful, and if we can pass off to our kids a baton that sends them further down the road than we were able to get, um, then we succeeded in a sense. But like you said, we're always going to be trying to be more perfect.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think that, this has been a healthy conversation, and I know I could go on all day here.
Yeah.
This is one of
Oh, I
my
could too.
favorite topics, but
Yeah.
it's the middle of the workday for me. But I am so grateful that we had this opportunity to check in. But before we go today, I know a lot of people probably know your work through your podcast, but might not have had the opportunity to see you actually working with your students. And so I would love to play a recording of you conducting your choir if you've got a few moments to spare.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great.
Awesome. Great. So I'm going to just share my screen here, and we're going to load up some Bruckner. I'm very excited. And can you tell us about the venue?
So yeah, this is the Visitation Catholic Parish in Kansas City. We have a tradition of doing our end of the year concert there. Once the seniors are about done with school, we have our two chamber choirs. We have an 11th and 12th grade chamber choir and a ninth and 10th grade chamber choir that you can see sitting over here on the left of the. I direct the 11, 12 group, and they have a concert just for them and their parents, and there's usually a lot of crying at the end, and this is kind of our culminating event of the year.
Awesome. And so here we go. Bruckner's OCST. Awesome. That's so lovely. It's so great. Your choir has such a great sound. I'm sure you really missed
Oh man,
being
I
with
that was emotionally emotional for me to watch. I
yeah.
that was of course that concert for us was canceled this year. So that recording was from the
Yeah.
previous year. And
Hmm.
so our current seniors, many of whom were in that choir just that you just saw, did not get to do their final concert. And yeah, like we said at the very beginning, it's grieving at this point.
Yeah,
Um, thank you
absolutely.
for playing that. Awesome.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, it was truly my pleasure. I loved being able to just great way to kind of cool down after our
Yeah,
conversation here today.
good.
So thank you so much. I'm so glad we were able to connect, and I hope that we do this again because there's still so much. There's still so
Yeah.
much to unpack. And thank you for all that you do. People love your contributions to the choral community, and I'm one of them. I'm a big fan. So thank you so much for expanding the conversation on so many different
Well,
fronts.
thank you so much for having me. It's really fun to have the role reversed a little bit and having you grill me. It's usually the other way around, so that this was kind of a fun change, and I'm really excited to be a part of the conversation. I don't have all the answers, but like I said, pull up as many chairs as we can get to the table, and let's make progress.
Absolutely. Amen. Amen. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in today, and we will catch you next week. So next week we're sticking with diversity, and so my wonderful colleagues Eugene Rogers and Penelope Cruz, who were chairing the Diversity Initiatives Committee, the inaugural Diversity ACDA Diversity Initiatives Committee, are going to be on. So we're going to be talking a lot about what the committee's specific work is and what has been happening and what is going to be happening as we continue to move forward, and making sure that people have resources. I absolutely love working with Eugene and Penelope. They are some of the just most inspiring people I've ever had the pleasure of working with. So definitely make sure you tune in then. And we'll see everybody next week. Take it easy.
Great. Thanks, Ariane. Thank you so much, as always, for sticking around to the end of an in-depth and lengthy conversation. Again, you've heard me talk about this just now with Arreon and so many other times on the show. I deeply believe in the value of conversation, and for those of you who are willing to invest the time in thinking about ideas and discussing ideas, you are the bread and butter of a show like this. This is what we need, in my opinion, and I'm sure if you're still listening at this point, you agree with that. So thank you so much for listening to the conversation, even if you don't agree with everything. That's really important. And to that note, I would like to strongly encourage those of you who would like to be part of the conversation to join the Choralosophers Facebook page. It's okay to disagree. It's okay to reach out to me with your disagreements. You can do them on the Choralosophers Facebook page. You can also do them if you would rather do it in private, because that does allow us that higher resolution exchange back and forth, to send an email to choralosophy@gmail.com, or even better, join the Patreon for as little as $3 a month, where there are ways to have conversations on that site as well that don't have the dog pile on effect of a Facebook type environment. So this is what we're trying to do, is to improve the quality of the conversation, not to make everyone agree, but to improve the quality of the overall conversation. Other things you can do to support the show, of course, are leave a rating, subscribe on an app if you haven't already. Of course, the big one is share the episodes if you find them useful. Even if you're going back through the feed to earlier episodes and listening to other topics and you find one that you really enjoyed and was really helpful, do me a favor and share it. That's one of the hardest things about this, and honestly, one of the most expensive things about running a podcast is getting people to see it, with the Facebook algorithm and having to pay for ads and all that type of stuff. So if you can help me beat the algorithm. That's the rhythm of Al Gore, by the way, the algorithm. You can help me beat Al Gore and his rhythm by sharing the episode. So that's really, really important. And of course, hitting up our sponsors, sightreadingfactory.com, ryanmain.com, graphitepublishing.com, and vocevista.com/choralosophy. Hitting those sponsors up and patronizing them using my code whenever you can are all great ways to support the show. Thank you so much. Keep the conversation going, and we'll see you next time.